Hello everyone, thank you very much for listening to Powerful Nothing. Before we jump in, we just wanted to let you all know that Powerful Nothing now has a TCG Player affiliate link. If you're thinking of picking up any cards that we talk about in the podcast, please consider using the link that you can find in the show notes below. It's a great way of supporting the podcast and helps us grow and do more cool things. But with that out of the way, let's jump into today's episode. Hello everyone and welcome back to Powerful Nothing, a Magic the Gathering Cube podcast. I'm your host Dan, and on the internet is Too Sweet MTG, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host James. How's it going, man? You well?
Yeah, pretty good. Can't complain.
Sweet. Well, we have an awesome episode for everyone today. Today we're going to be doing a bit of a review on the Vintage Cube Live powered by Ultimate Guard, to give it its full title, I think, which is quite possibly one of the most impactful Cube events, and possibly for the highest stakes, maybe ever. I don't know how much the pros really gamble for behind the scenes, but there was a lot of spice going on in this tournament. So we're going to be talking about that as our main topic today. Time codes will be down in the description below if you want to jump around. But before we jump into that, let's talk about some news. And because we're coming off of the back of MagicCon Vegas, there was quite a lot of news and there's quite a bit for us to get through today. So we have a bit of a list. Let's start going through them. So firstly, is that they announced that from 2027, standard rotation is being changed. So currently, I think it's like the third or fourth set of the year. It's not like August, September, when rotation normally is. From 2027, standard rotation is being changed so that it will update and cards will rotate when the first set of the calendar year is released. This does kind of make sense as they're trying to use standard as the way of onboarding new players into competitive Magic. Having it... It's just easier to explain to people that kind of as soon as there's a set in a new year, that's when rotation happened. New year, new changes, that kind of thing. I think that kind of no one's going to be really angry at this change. There'll be probably there'll be one rotation where it's delayed by effectively like one set. So rather than it being the winter set, it'll be the first set of the new year. But I think generally everyone's kind of everyone will be okay with this one. But an important bit of news for standard players. James, thoughts?
Yeah, this makes complete sense to me, just making it a little bit more intuitive. So it's not something you have to look up every time. Sounds like a positive. I will say I hope that if they have the rotation on that first set slot, they also have a standard Pro Tour sort of 2 to 3 weeks after it, because those are always some of the really interesting events. I think the immediate post-rotation Pro Tour where you have all new decks, or even if not a Pro Tour, like a GP or something, you know?
No, yeah. They're always the fun ones where kind of like the format's still a little bit new and people are working out, like the best thing hasn't been decided yet. Yeah, that's always fun. The next bit of news is that MSRP is coming back. For those unaware, they effectively took the suggested retail price off of products a couple of years ago. And effectively, it's kind of a reason why Magic has kind of got more expensive. So with Foundations, products are being released with MSRP. So, I mean, for context, a play booster is now $5.25. Oddly, from Aether Drift, they've already announced that the price of the product is going up. So a play booster is going up by 25 cents. The rest of it kind of seems to be in line with what it was before. Oh no, hold on. The bundle's going up by $4. So yes, they've immediately announced MSRP is coming back, and immediately announced it's getting more expensive in Q1 next year. So that's nice of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think just having an MSRP again is broadly a good thing. Listen, it doesn't mean products will never cost more or less than that. Supply and demand still applies here. Very low print run, high demand sets will still go for more than MSRP, but at least you're kind of aware of that when you're buying it, right? If there is an MSRP, whereas in the system we've had for the last few years where there just hasn't been an MSRP at all, it gives you a little less transparency, right? At least when they release the MSRP, you know how much Wizards thinks you should be paying for this product.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of my guess is this actual change generally affects like specifically with things like booster packs, but kind of like a lot of things here I'm looking at is things like they're giving prices for like collector boosters and like jumpstart boosters and bundles and beginner boxes. Like, I don't know about you, James, but the actual product I buy from Wizards as a relatively enfranchised player is just going down and down. Like, effectively, the money Wizards get from me is like a pre-release kit, and then I buy singles. that's generally how more enfranchised players will generally interact with Magic. And so kind of like things like people picking up boosters. Yes, it will be people at game stores buying boosters because they like it. But like if you're drafting a lot, you generally people generally buy booster boxes, that kind of stuff, and draft with friends, that kind of thing. So kind of like specifically like the gouging of kind of like booster backs and the booster backs and costs is generally something that will affect less enfranchised players because they don't really know how much things cost, that kind of thing. So there being a price back on the product, I think, is good because it will just effectively mean people are less likely to feel bad about their purchase because they know roughly it's in line with how much it should be when they buy it.
Exactly. And it gives you a lot. Yeah, if you are that new player, I guess it gives you a little bit more transparency as well about, if I'm signing up for a draft, the draft costs this much. That sounds about right because the booster packs each MSRP at this much, and then I pay a bit for the prize pool, right? Yeah, I think there's no downside to having that price on the product, right? I think this is a positive for players.
Yeah, 100%. All right, so the first two, I think we're kind of both on board with. Oh, the next one could be a bit more spicy. So they've also announced that Universes Beyond will be legal in all formats going forward. So importantly, this now includes Standard and Pioneer. So I have some notes, but James, I know that you've actually played these formats more recently, and you generally play more competitive, where this is going to be more likely to be a thing. What's your thoughts? So there is a bit more news to this, but specifically on Universes Beyond being legal in all formats, how do you feel about that?
So I think there's two bits of this to approach, right? There's the bit of we are shifting these Universes Beyond products from direct to modern to standard. The direct to modern stuff for Universes Beyond, we've basically just seen Lord of the Rings so far, but we're getting Fallout.
Assassin's Creed was modern legal for what that's worth.
Sure. But the ones aimed at competitive play, which these are, right? Like these are going to be proper standard sets that people draft and are part of that standard rotation. Shifting then to standard, I think purely from a gameplay point of view, I'm not especially worried about power level. Like obviously, we associate Universes Beyond with like One Ring, Orcish Bowmaster stuff, but these were sets designed for standard. I still have just about enough trust in Wizards that the cards aren't going to look like that. So I think there is a bit of a concern that I think with Universes Beyond, there's sometimes a bit of an external pressure to push certain cards to be competitively viable. Mm-hmm. Like they're really going to want Spider-Man to not suck, right? Like if Spider-Man is not standard playable, I think that's probably a negative for Wizards. And we've seen before, I think, when they try and make a card like good in a format, then they overshoot a little bit, then it's a really big problem, right? Whereas if they're aiming all the cards at that sort of potentially playable power level, then the natural variations are kind of okay. Whereas if some of them are aimed a bit higher, then when they overshoot, it's really, really bad.
And the ones they do tend to. So I'm just thinking of like examples of like Universes Within cards. Normal Magic cards. Like when they have overshot, they do tend to be a bit slower on banning them when they are cards that are kind of like signature cards of like sets. So like say it was Spider-Man, like realistically, there isn't going to be just one Spider-Man in the Universes Beyond Spider-Man set. There's going to be like 20 of the buggers. But like, was it like Shadows over Innistrad, where like it was Liliana and Emrakul were kind of like the signature cards in the set, and Emrakul was a very broken deck because of what was the card that cheated it into play, James?
E4X Marvel?
That would be it. Yes, you could cheat in the big Emrakul with E4X Marvel, which is not something they planned, and it was a very good deck, but they effectively that is an example of them delaying the banning because it was a signature card. They basically delayed it until after a big tournament where it could be displayed. My worry, I guess, is something could happen kind of similar to that with these kind of Universes Beyond sets, where kind of like say there is only one Spider-Man. Like if it's busted, they will not want to ban it anywhere near as quickly. Like in the same way the One Ring hasn't been banned in Modern yet, as an example.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's the perfect example, right? Like the One Ring, they were clearly trying to make into a powerful modern card. And then you only need to overshoot a tiny bit, and you're in the spot we're in right now, where the One Ring is played in like 60% of the meta, and it's kind of miserable, in my opinion. So yeah, I think that's certainly a risk on the competitive side. I think there's also, I'm not normally a big guy for the whole like immersion argument in the game, right? Like, it didn't massively bother me having this stuff in modern or whatever, but this is going to feel very jarring, I think, when we first see these cards crop up in standard. In a way that the other Universes Beyond stuff hasn't, because the other Universes Beyond stuff has basically been either the stuff that's only played in Commander, which is Commander, I think you expect anything, right? Or it's Lord of the Rings and and Magic the Gathering being a fantasy universe is like broadly derived from Tolkien in a larger picture sense anyway, right? So it like those cards could have just been printed as Magic cards in the most part. Whereas it's going to feel quite different, I think, when it's Spider-Man, and especially when this isn't just going to be cards, right? It's going to be decks, because that's how standard works, right? Because there's a smaller number of sets, you get whole decks built out of one or two sets, or in terms of the overarching themes. So you know it's going to be quite a different having there's an Orcish Bowmasters in the modern deck versus like I'm playing Spider-Man Control versus X-Men aggro. You know, like
Jesus,
and that is kind of what it's going to be. Right?
It will be. That's
going to be standard.
Right.
And
there'll be some Final Fantasy in there as well, James.
Yeah, but I didn't know what anyone was called in that, so I couldn't.
There's a character called Sephiroth, I believe, but I might have mispronounced it.
Sephiroth Tempo will throw in there as well. I think that is going to feel weird, right? And I think there'll be players who love that. There'll be players who absolutely hate that. I'm sure I'll end up probably in between, probably a slight negative for me. Watching Worlds this weekend, I was like, actually, this would be less cool if it was like a bunch of random comic book people that I don't care about. Because I think at some point, if Magic continues down this road, right, where we first got Universe Beyond like 3-4 years ago, and they were like, it's just going to be secret layers, nothing for competitive, and then it's just for modern, but you just sort of opt out. We all still have all these other formats. It's not going to be for standard. Now it is for standard.
Yeah.
And I think there's a risk that at some point Magic starts to feel like kind of just a disparate bunch of brands and entertainment franchises trying to sell stuff to you.
Are you just describing Hasbro there, James?
Yeah.
We got him.
That hasn't been what Magic has felt like up to this point to me. And like generally, I'm someone who I just want the game to be good, and I don't really care that much about the other stuff. Like, it's cool when the flavor works, but it's not normally a deal breaker for me. But I think this could make Magic feel less cool as a game, and I think that's a shame.
I agree. I think from my point of view, like specifically on this, so this kind of leads into some news when I move on to a moment, just in terms of the quantity of the product we're going to be getting. But I do worry that Magic will lose its identity, and I am not saying like if you like the Magic storyline, like the products they release, like the stories they release, then awesome. I love that people like it. For me personally, I like the idea of the Magic storyline, but it's never really hit me. Like I don't know if anyone's ever tried reading any of like the early lore books, because dear God, they are woeful. Like they're super high fantasy, but they're kind of bollocks. Like in terms of like what happens and that kind of stuff. But there is so much room there for it to be cool. Basically, like at some point I need to do a video about this, because like effectively what they need to do is just do what Warhammer have done, and just basically pay a bunch of really talented authors to just write books in the world of Magic. And that's what I want them to do. I want to hear just like a random story about someone on Innistrad, because there's so much cool stuff you can do there. And if you're not tied down by like, it has to tie in, like I'm kind of veering off into my issues with the Magic story, but like some of it is like that they're kind of like we have to like work in set mechanic this key point to kind of get us into a like everything has to be a multi-year story, all this kind of stuff. Just give me a couple of good stories on different planes because there's so much potential there. But my worry with all this, my worry with the Universes Beyond stuff is that it just becomes like effectively that becomes the storyline. Like, are we going to have a Jace Marvel crossover potentially? But is that like that could just be where they're going with this, or effectively it gets to a point where they kind of we don't need to bother with the storyline at all. We can just take an IP from somewhere else and the storyline's already pre-baked into it. We can just do references in the cards, that kind of stuff. And we don't even have to bother with having a writing stuff or anything like that. That's kind of, I guess, my main worry with this.
Yeah, for Universes Beyond stuff, there isn't even a storyline, right? Like, obviously Marvel has a storyline, but they're not trying to convey any one Marvel storyline through the cards, right? They're just, here's some stuff from Marvel, basically. And I think I'm the same. I tried reading one Magic book once. It was one people had told me it was one of the good ones, and dear Lord, it was bad. But I think one thing Magic does do quite well is, even if you're not really paying attention to the story, it conveys some amount of it to you just through the cards, right?
Yeah.
Like, you couldn't play, for example, the like Shadows over Innistrad block without getting the general vibe that creepy stuff has happened. There's some tentacles. We're not sure who it is. Oh, look, it's Emrakul. Big Eldrazi invasion. Like, they can get stuff across and do a bit of character development through just the Magic cards, which is actually quite impressive. And yeah, that's, they're not really going to be doing that right with Universes Beyond stuff. It's just a popular character two people like on a Magic card.
Exactly. And I think for context, this is the next bit of news we're going to get into. We've kind of been bearing the lead a bit by me and James giving out about it a little bit. But they've announced that kind of from next year, or for next year, that they haven't announced the product lineup for the years after that. But for next year, we are going to be getting 6 standard releases. 3 are going to be Magic themed and 3 are going to be non-Magic themed. And that basically means there's going to be a new set every 2 months. And it's going to average out that 1 will be in the Magic IP and 1 won't be. So already that's 50% of our Magic isn't. I don't want to sound like a boomer, but like 50% of our Magic is not Magic, if that makes sense. James, how do you feel about this?
Yeah, this is kind of wild. So this is 6. This is a set every 2 months before you get to any supplemental product that isn't in standard. It's kind of wild. And I think it's actually a shame because I think what they have tried to do with some of this stuff is to get paper standard back into a better place where people actually play it. And I think this is a massive step backwards for that, actually. Because just the effort needed to maintain, and stay up to date with paper standard now is going to be ridiculous. Like, you're gonna have bought a deck, played it probably 3 or 4 times, and then it'll be out of date, realistically. It's kind of wild. And yeah, I have quite a lot of issues with this.
What about us, James? We have to do set reviews on these buggers.
Well, that's another issue. But
that's a conversation for Christmas, but we'll work that out then.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, if you were trying to play a bunch of paper RCQs, for example, this is going to make it pretty tough. You're going to get in 3 RCQs, and then another set comes out, and then your deck's out of date, right? And sure, not every set release is going to invalidate your deck, but actually a decent amount of them will in standard. It also means the standard format's going to end up being really big because they're on 3-year rotations now, right? So that's going to be 18 set standard.
Yeah.
Which is kind of insane. Which is kind of more extended, really, than anything else. And that's going to mean it's much harder then for new sets to actually make an impact on standard, but they want every set to make an impact on standard because that's a large part of what sells sets. And then they push cards because it's we've got to... the Unholy Annex card is dominating standard, right? We need to make something better than the Unholy Annex so that it can go over top of it. And that is how you end up with power creep, right? And a lot of ways standard has got through that is that it doesn't get bigger than a certain number of sets, and then it rotates, so it stays impactful, and that's just not going to be the case anymore.
I'm looking at the schedule. I'll go through it in full, like the full schedule in a moment, but there is one block in the middle where there's 7 weeks between sets, between standard legal sets, 7 weeks. So on the 14th of February, Aether Drift is being released. I'm actually kind of up for this set. It's the race set across multiple planes. I like the concept. It could be cool. On the 11th of April, we have Tarkir Dragonstorm. So this is our return to Tarkir. And it's got the word Dragonstorm in the name. I'm kind of up for that. On the 13th of June, we have the Final Fantasy set. So that's our first Universes Beyond set. On the 1st of August, so this is the 7-week gap between them, we have Edge of Eternities. That is the magic themed but like space opera style of set. Then TBA, so sometime in Q3, I would guess, 2025, we have Marvel's Spider-Man. And then at an undisclosed time, so sometime after Spider-Man, so from between August and December, we're going to have 2 releases, is an Unknown Universes Beyond set. If this is Warhammer, I'm going to take back everything I say and love it. But otherwise, my guess is it'll be another Marvel set, if I'm honest with you. But yeah, that is a lot of Magic sets coming out next year. Again, on top of miscellaneous Commander decks. So actually from next year, there will be, if they release Commander decks on top of this, there will be more non-Magic stuff than Magic stuff. Themed-wise, anyway.
Yeah. Isn't there enough Marvel stuff in the world? Just putting it out there. Feels quite hard to not engage with Marvel.
I mean, I've done a pretty good job of not engaging with it since Endgame, but I think that's quite like a lot of people. But so worth mentioning here. I don't want to yuck anyone's yum. If you love Marvel, then crack on with this. And I don't think we're just here negging on a particular fan base or a particular like IP. Like just because I'm not the biggest fan of Final Fantasy doesn't mean I don't want people to enjoy it. There'll be stuff in there for me to like. I think part of it is part of the thing that got me into Magic as a kid or got me into Magic was the theming. And I'm just a bit worried that we're going to lose its identity with some of this.
Yeah, for sure. I know this is like a grey area, and maybe this argument doesn't make much logical sense, but I felt more okay with the Universes Beyond stuff when it wasn't in standard, because it felt sort of opt-in, and like there was still a version of Magic that was the Magic we sort of got into and that made us fall in love with the game. And it sort of feels like this announcement has removed that. Like it's no longer opt-in, and the Universes Beyond stuff is now just basically what Magic is.
I do agree. I'll play devil's advocate a little bit here. They're kind of like, it does bring new players into the game, and like my best friend got into playing, or like we're kind of tempted by Magic, and then the Lord of the Rings set came in. That's what we loved as kids. We used to play Lord of the Rings. Like how we became friends was effectively like one of the main reasons was Lord of the Rings Warhammer. That was kind of like that got him in, and now he's hooked to playing Magic. Like Marvel will be a big one for people as well. I know a bunch of people who have not played Magic yet, but love that kind. But they have been Magic adjacent their whole lives, but have never had that little push. The Marvel will be the push. So there could be a world where I get to play Magic with a whole group of friends who I've not played Magic with before because of these sets. So that could be cool, but I guess it's finding the balance. And my worry is that Hasbro specifically will not be looking at finding a balance. Like my biggest fear is that in like we're looking back at this point in like 10 years, and the excitement is when we get like the Universes Beyond is like Magic themed. Yeah. It's like Dominaria themed. It like Universes Beyond Magic the Gathering presents Universes Beyond Magic the Gathering. Is my fear.
Yeah. Secret lair Magic multiverse.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I mean the thing is right, and you're right. It does bring in new players, and that's really good, and that's good for all of the player base if more people join. But the thing that this leads to, right, is because if you're Wizards, you're just looking at the numbers, or certainly if you're Hasbro, you're just looking at the numbers and they'll see, Lord of the Rings, biggest selling set ever. Universes Beyond sets always do great. And the reason is, right, that the Universes Beyond sets, the Magic people will buy them because they like playing Magic, and the people who like Lord of the Rings will buy them too, who wouldn't always otherwise have bought them. So you get two fan bases. I think if you go back to that well too many times, you start to drive away some of the existing people potentially. And listen, maybe that is just the direction it goes in, and this is how games evolve. Magic has been around a very long time. The things that you do for your fan base of your game when it's 30 years old, but it's not just the game that changes, the fan base changes. But I think, for me personally, I feel like that this doesn't improve my experience of the game. And maybe, I don't know, maybe I would feel differently if this was like an IP that I cared about, but I kind of think actually I was cool with it when I was like, give me a secret lair or something, fine, yeah, great. But I don't need this to be all of Magic.
On the plus side, James, this is a Cube podcast, and I guess
that is true.
I guess in Cube we can control what we want. So that is the silver lining with this. If anyone is least likely to be affected by this, it's potentially us. So I do love that. And that will play into our main topic when we get onto the Magic Online Vintage Cube. But there's a few more bits of news. Let's crack on. I know we're going to stuck on that for a while, but it's something I think we both wanted to have a bit of a chat about. One other bit of news, and this is kind of one I wasn't really expecting, but they changed the way that damage is dealt. So I'm going to ham-fistedly go through this, and then I'll get James to correct me when I balls it up a little bit. All right, so the gist is they've removed the assign damage step. So they are changing the way that you are assigning damage. So previously, if you attacked and your opponent blocked with two creatures, you could assign damage to them how you wanted to. You had to assign lethal damage to the first one before you could deal it to the second one. But that is how damage worked. And in that step, someone could respond to how blocks were assigned. So say my creature was swinging in and I dealt the damage to one creature, but the opponent wanted it to survive. They could play a combat trick, boost it up, and basically they can wait to see how you are dealing damage before. Both players can wait to see how damage is assigned before responding to it.
As the attacker, you choose the order in which creatures will be assigned damage. The first creature still has to be assigned lethal damage before you assign any damage to the second creature, but you order this creature first, this creature second in a double block, and then there's this possibility for the opponent to take more game actions.
Yeah, and that is the part they are getting rid of. Now there is no now effectively that all the assigning damage happens in the damage step. So now there's no there's no way to respond to it. So if you want to cast a combat trick to try and save the creature, you have to do it in blocks. You can't do it. You can't wait for damage, because by the time you get to the damage step, the damage will have been dealt, but it's in the damage step where it's kind of being decided.
Yeah, exactly. They're getting rid of the step of ordering blockers specifically, right? Damage was actually always a separate step of because if you, in the previous system, if you ordered one creature first, one creature second, your opponent got a chance to respond. You would then go to damage after they'd had a chance to respond, and you did have the option to say assign all the damage to a first creature and none to the second if that was what you wanted to do, and that wasn't something the opponent could respond to. But they could respond to ordering blockers, and that is the thing that has been removed.
Okay, nice. So they've done this as a way of kind of simplifying things. They said they've been playing this internally for about a year. I think the TLDR with this is it effectively makes combat tricks slightly worse because there's less opportunity to kind of get someone. One thing that has got slightly better is that things like Pyroclasm, so effects that deal damage to multiple creatures, have got better, along with effects that minus power and toughness of multiple creatures. Because one thing that you can now do with this rule change is you do not have to assign lethal damage to a creature before you move on to the next creature. So say I have a 4/4 that's swinging in to 2 4/4s, and they block with both 4/4s. I can assign 2 damage to both creatures. I won't kill them, but I could then follow up with an effect that deals them 2 damage, and then in theory they already have 2 damage marked on them for the rest of the turn, and that kind of thing works. So, my guess is this won't affect games a vast amount, especially as kind of combat tricks are kind of less like they're less bread and butter when it comes to standard sets nowadays. But yeah, James, what do you think of the rule change?
Yeah, I mean, as with all combat interaction stuff, the format this affects most is limited, right? That's a format where you get most into the weeds with lots of double blocks, and combat is the thing that really matters most of the time. I think it makes combat tricks slightly worse specifically on defense, which was generally not how you ideally wanted to use your combat tricks anyway, but it was a real part of their range. And yes, the thing you really can't do anymore is I block your 4/4 with 2 3/3s, you put 1 in front, I cast a Giant Growth to save it. Because after you've cast your Giant Growth, they'll just go, okay, I'll assign 3 damage to the other 3/3. So that's like, my initial reaction on reading this was kind of ambivalent. I didn't really mind either way. But I saw a Twitter thread where people were talking about it, and the thing that really jumped out to me was how many people seem to have a very imperfect understanding of the current system and how that worked. And
how did I do, James? How did I do? Did I do it?
Yeah.
Good.
I know you understand how combat works, but
Thank you.
but that does vibe my experience. If I've definitely had like in events with players who've been playing quite a long time, quite a few times been like, they line up multiple creatures. I'll be like, okay, I'll assign all the damage for the first one because the other one has a death trigger or whatever. And people be like surprised that you could do that. And I think if players who have been playing your game for quite a long time don't fully understand the system, then probably the system is too complicated. And I think that probably makes this broadly a good change.
Yeah, I'd go along with it. Yeah, it takes away a bit of edge cases, but to an extent, if it makes it simpler for everyone, then it's probably going to be fine. At the end of the day, it won't affect. It will change the way games are played, especially, as you mentioned, in limited. But yeah, the grand scheme of things, I don't think it's going to be a change for the worse, basically.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. One more bit of news, and then we'll move on to the Magic Online Vintage Cube Live. So, in the same weekend as all of these announcements and changes, we also had MagicCon Vegas, and at MagicCon Vegas, we had the World Championships. So it was taken down by Javier Dominguez, winning for the second time. James, I know you managed to catch a little bit. How was the World Championship, and what did you think about it?
Yeah, I really enjoyed watching bits of this, actually. I watched like a first couple of rounds of draft, which is normally my engagement because I don't tend to play a ton of standard. The draft was great. The Swan draft's great. I enjoyed that. And I actually tuned in for the top 8 as well and really enjoyed it. This standard format looks pretty fun. I say I tuned in. I watched on catch up because,
what time was that?
Unreasonable. Oh,
yeah, we're in the UK. There is not a time of the day where Vegas midday works for us.
Yeah, that's not happening. But no, it was really cool to watch back, actually. Javier absolutely crushed it. Second world title, playing a really sweet deck. I thought it was like Demir Demons with the Unholy Annex.
Which one's that? I love that card. Yeah. I had 2 of those at pre-release, and it was a house.
Oh yeah. The card's messed up. Yes, you have that and a bunch of additional demons, so that you still get the drain even if they kill the token you make. And then it kind of has like a combo finish as well with the Doomsday Excruciator.
Actually, the Mad Lad cast it, James.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a blue-black deck, but every land taps for black. And
there's a colorless land in there, James.
That's true. It might be like one Phantom Port, to be fair.
Yeah, Mad Lad.
But yeah, no, it has like a cool combo finish with Doomsday Excruciator, which is like 6 black mana. Beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card, and when it enters, each player exiles all but the bottom 6 cards of their library. The joke is you cast this, and then you play the Jace that mills, and you just mill them out. which is quite good. You also have a couple of, I think, 4
Nice.
copies of Restless Reef, which is like a blue-black creature land where when you attack, you mill them for 4. That also works.
Yeah, Jesus, that is in this deck. Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
Okay.
which is a really nice like finish to your blue-black control deck, right? But mostly it's about Unholy Annex being messed up, because when you reliably get the drain off that rather than losing life, that it's really dumb. Like you're draining for 2 and drawing an extra card each turn for 3 mana is pretty absurd. So yeah, they need to keep your demons off the board, and you have quite a lot of them. Is largely the plan here.
Yeah, that looks like a fun and very stupid deck.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, just if you only want to watch one match from Worlds, Javier's semi-final versus Seth Manfield was an absolute banger.
Did you see any of the other decks by chance, or?
Yes, there was some Gruul prowess using the ley line and some pump spells to double up your pump spells. Took down some games. I think this deck does almost always get quite a lot worse post-board, though, is the thing, because if people are in any way prepared for it, they just bring in some additional cut downs or whatever, and it's kind of tough from there. I mean, I'm sure it was a fine choice for the tournament, but yeah, I think I know it's like problematic in best of 1 and got banned, but I think in best of 3 it's almost certainly fine. There's Seth Manfield's on some good like Golgari mid-range ramp stuff with the Green Overlord, and that seems to be working pretty well using. Well, actually, I think there's multiple Overlords and Up for Beanstalk, because when you do the alternate cast of the Overlord, obviously it's still a spell with CMC 5 or greater for the purposes of Up the Beanstalk, so you just get to load up on cards that way and grind them out. Yeah, and then I think there were a much greater array of decks in the tournament, but those are the main ones I actually saw on the field. But yeah, so I think there's a lot of various control decks and some good red beatdown stuff as well.
Nice. Classic. Love it. All right. So with all the news out of the way, let's move on to our main topic of the day. So today, our main topic is we're going to be kind of reviewing the Magic Online Vintage Cube Live. So this was one of the highest staked cube drafts ever. So this was a cube draft in person using a real cube for keeps last weekend. How did we get to that point, James?
Yeah, it was not an easy road for these players. So to qualify, anyone could enter, which was really cool, and it was like $6 to enter. So very, very attainable. But you had to win your feeder league, which was your $6 to enter, and that was you had to go 4-0. And then from that point, you went into a 64-player event. You had to win that, so win the Swiss, and then 3 over top 8 draft, and then that would qualify you for a final 8-man draft. You had to win that draft to get to Vegas. So there's a lot of stages to get through. The players who've qualified have done a lot of winning to get here.
So let's talk about the players. So congratulations to the 8 players who managed to get here. So first of all, we in week 1 we had Munson Jenkins, otherwise known as Matthew Abrams. We had week 2 we had Foolish Puppy, otherwise known as Christopher Bruner. On week 3 we had Fur MTG, otherwise known as Fernando Palmero Garcia. On week 4 we had Luka Jax, in real life known as Luka Jakovitz. In week 5 we had Slacks, otherwise known as Jesse Hampton. In week 6 we had Rex Jax, otherwise known as Rex Jakovitz. You might have noticed a pattern in the naming there. In week 7, we had Lenny, otherwise known as Daniel Prosek. And in week 8, we had Sheffen, otherwise known as Oscar Christensen. So yeah, so as we mentioned, the amount of magic, or the amount of high pressure magic they took them to get there was kind of wild. And I think they actually published their win-loss records on MitGo Vintage Cube before the tournament, and there are some people, some people had played a shockingly small amount of like MitGo or like MitGo in general. Like this definitely shows that kind of this got people into playing MitGo, which if that was their goal, that really worked. But like someone like Munson Jenkins, Matthew Abrams, he had played 21 games before this. In limited play, his win-loss record was 100%. That's kind of wild. But like, that's the smallest number. On the other end of the spectrum, you have Foolish Puppy, who Christopher Bruno, who won the second week. He played, Jesus, all time 1,087 Vintage Cube wins, like matches of Cube 1. Those are wild numbers. Like you have FoMTG with 911 all-time game wins on MitGo. Like those are some serious numbers, James.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know that I want to know my number, to be fair, but
pretty good. Right.
I know I want to know the win percentage. I don't know. I want to know lifetime games played though.
That's fair. Yes,
it might be terrifying.
Yes,
it's been around a long time, Vintage Cube. But no, it was. I did think it was cool that it wasn't just cube grinders showing up and playing these events. It was everyone, basically, seemingly, who likes cube and plays at all. I think a lot of these people some of these people probably got Magic Online accounts to play this. And that's really cool. And it's cool that some of those people made it here. Like, I think it would actually be a shame for the event if you looked at the top 8 and it was just all the people who spend loads and loads of time playing MitGo Vintage Cube.
Exactly. And worth mentioning, like, kind of, a lot of these players spent a lot of time playing it. Some people, I think 2 of these players, I can't remember which 2, but only entered once. So 2 players put in $6 and just ran the table and got to Vegas.
It's not bad, that, is it?
That's
$6
kind of wild.
well spent. Yeah,
that's a very good investment. Jesus. But like that does show, yeah. The fact it was open to everyone is awesome. And like, yeah, I hope they do something like this again in the future. It's going to be a couple of years, I think. But so those are the players. What are they playing for? So what they were playing for was the cube itself. So this is a powered cube. We'll move on to the breakdown of the cube in a little bit. But basically, this cube had Power 9 in it. If you opened a Black Lotus, you got to keep the Black Lotus. How the prizes worked is effectively the prize was to a large extent, the prize was the draft. You got to play in this tournament and you got to keep what you drafted. After that, so there were 360 cards drafted of this 540 cube. Afterwards, each player got to pick one card based on the order that they finished. So whoever finished first got to pick one card from the remainder of all the undrafted cards. That went down from 1 to 8. Then after that, the remaining 172 cards just went to the winner. And I know you're thinking, like, oh, yes, the power's expensive, but like, how expensive is a lightning bolt? That kind of stuff. They found the best versions that they could. So there's like beta or alpha lightning bolts in there. There are signed cards and like literally one-of-one cards in here. We'll get onto those as well in a little bit when we kind of talk about the cube. But yeah, as a prize, nothing like we've seen nothing like this before.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But it's sort of it's Modo powered cube based, I'd guess, but with a much heavier emphasis on older cards. I think there's a pretty similar version of the cube up on Magic Online right now, and it's it sort of feels like Cube of 5 years ago in like a really good way. I think like it's got some of the really cool new cards, but there isn't like Minsk and Boo and Comet and all that stuff, right? And it means I think it's shifted a lot more to like control and combo rather than aggro being quite as pushed, which is, I mean, I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing, but it's cool that it's like a bit different. And I think if you're going to do a one vintage cube probably ever like this, right, in paper, then it's cool to have it be like, this is what vintage cube is, rather than this is like just the current evolution. It's got a lot of like stuff that maybe isn't quite good enough anymore, but we associate as cube staples, like Consecrated Sphinx is in here, and I think probably pretty good. Splinter Twins in, and probably actually good. Whereas those cards have kind of got pushed out of current Modo Cube, or the version we had with all of her recent cards. So yeah, I think it was a nice bit of cube design to pull that off.
Yeah, I really like this cube. It's kind of wild, but kind of there are versions on there are links on. If I can find it, I will put a link to it in the show notes. Where basically someone has collated the annual updates to the Mitgo Vintage Cube from 2010 to 2024. Effectively, they put it on them, and or they put them all in there. And effectively, for up until about 2020, the cube looked relatively like this. It is the last couple of years where there's been a bit of a push for just raw power level of cards, and that feels like it's more kind of it feels like if someone this is kind of the average cube over the last 15 years, but the outliers from just single card power level haven't been included. So, and I did quite like that. So yeah, so you mentioned no Minsk and Boo, they're running Dragon Lord Ataka instead of that. I love that. But there's no Shieldred. There's Braids Cabal minion in there. I love that. There's no Fourth Airlingus. There's no One Ring. It really reminded me of when I started playing Powered Cube, and there's very little monarchy. There's no initiative. Those are some cards that it wasn't running. Were there any cards that stood out to you, James, as kind of maybe not power level, this is a banger, but that you were kind of glad to see included?
So I've done what said there's a cube on Mitgo which is sort of as close to Fist as you can get on Mitgo, because obviously you can't have the unique cards, which we'll talk about later. But in that draft, I played Smokestack and Tangle Wire.
Ooh, James.
They're actually not awful. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was good to see those. Kind of some of the ones that stuck out to me was like Pack Rats in this, James. I remember when I started playing, Pack Rat was one of the most powerful cards imaginable, and it does just take over games. And there was a bit in coverage where if it had survived, it would have done a hell of a thing. But yeah, it was good to see Pack Rat. My heart skipped a beat, James, when I saw Jackal Pup. I'm going to read Jackal Pup for those who've only been cubing in the last couple of years, because dear God, you will have not seen this card. It was in the Powered Cube in the Image Cube for quite a while. I will say longer than it probably should have been. But Jackal Pup is a single red for a 2/1. Whenever Jackal Pup is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to you. This got power crept a decade ago. Because that is a downside on a 1-mana 2/1. But I love that is proper Magic, James.
Red didn't used to get too powerful 1 mana.
Yeah.
This was a revolutionary card at the time, I'm sure. It was cool that it felt like sort of the history of Mitgo Vintage Cube in one place.
Yeah, it was sweet. If I'm honest, there's a couple of other cards I just want to talk about because I like them. If you'll indulge me, James.
Yeah, go for it.
It was good to see Cursed Scroll make a comeback. I love that card. I had that in a gold bordered deck when I was a kid, and I almost put my wife off playing Magic because of Cursed Scroll. I was just getting her into it, and then we went on holiday, and I had a deck. We were kind of doing a draft thing, and just Scroll Rack is kind of unbeatable when you only ever have one card in hand. You just deal 2 damage every turn to their best creature, that kind of stuff. And there's a point where if I hadn't taken it out of that cube thing we were playing, that she might not be going to America to play in the Eternal weekend soon. So I love Ghost Scroll. It was good to see it. Things like Gideon Jura and Elspeth Sun's Champion, those are still very strong Magic cards, but there's just cheaper, more efficient things now, which is kind of a shame. But they are just Gideon Jura. It must be one of the best cards that is 20p.
Yeah. Yeah, it does some stuff. It's a bit
It is 5 mana, I know.
it's very 5 mana at this point, isn't it? And it doesn't kill them that quickly.
But it feels cleaner than it doesn't add the initiative, and I think I like that.
Oh yeah, no,
yeah.
I do like it. It's cool. I love for Opposition was back in.
Opposition, Deranged Hermit and Deep Forest Hermit, they were both in support it as well.
Yeah. And you can, I think you can make Opposition work in a lot of colors, Esper Opposition with some Lingering Souls and some white token stuff before. You can do it in Grixis even, you've got like the Duretti or whatever to make 1/1. So it all kind of works. I love that card. The other card, which I actually think is still good enough for Mitgo Vintage Cube, and I really want them to put it back in all the time, is Gilded Drake. I think that card's so fun.
Yeah.
If you just combine, so this is for people who aren't boomer enough to know what a Gilded Drake is. It's
Commander players know Gilded Drake, James.
Yeah.
We just don't own one.
Yes. Yeah. It's 2 mana for a 3/3 flyer. When it ETBs, you exchange control of it and target creature your opponent controls if you don't, you sack it. So the main thing you want to do with Gilded Drake and Cube is combine it with a bunch of bounce effects. So you go like Gilded Drake, steal your creature, then like 3 mana Fairy Say, bounce my Gilded Drake back to my hand, play it again, steal another creature, keep going. I always find those decks super fun. But yeah, there's a ton of cool stuff in here. But it's got some good nostalgia value, I think, this cube.
Yeah, there was a lot of cards I was happy to see. Some other cards that were very cool to see were the specific, like, effectively one of one cards, because effectively these are cards that people had given from personal collections to the tournament. So, for example, like LSV signed an Alpha Llanowar Elves. That's like $100 compared to your normal 20p Llanowar Elves because it's Alpha. If you can even get one, because there were so few of them actually printed. Reed Duke signed a Liliana with Veil, kind of a card he's synonymous with. One of the cool ones was that Gabriel Nassif signed a Cruel Ultimatum. Not just any Cruel Ultimatum. It was the called shot Cruel Ultimatum, where in a Pro Tour quarterfinals on coverage, he needed exactly Cruel Ultimatum to win a game, otherwise he was out of the tournament. So he draws a card face down, says Cruel Ultimatum, starts tapping his mana, and flips the card, and it's Cruel Ultimatum. That exact Cruel Ultimatum he signed, and it was in this cube for someone to take home with them. That's really awesome.
Yeah, for sure. I thought that whole collection of side cards was really sick, actually. There was one as well from, I can't remember who now, one of the American pros, but had signed a duress, and it was a duress that he'd used to win 2 separate Pro Tours, like 10 years apart, and it had been in both of those decks. Like that's just like a really cool way of adding a bunch of character to the cube, right?
Yeah, definitely. One other thing they did is that they put in some Mystery Booster 2 cards, and these were 2 cards that, so we're going back a bit now. So basically, currently it's Worlds, previously it was the Invitational. If you won that, one of the prizes was you would get to submit a card for them to print. And there were 2 cards, one from John Finkel and one from Kai Buddha, that effectively were too good for them to print in actual paper at that time. So they printed other things. So the card that actually got printed for John Finkel was Shadow Mage Infiltrator, which people have seen as a very cool card. The card they added to the cube, though, and he signed this, was Wrath of Leknif. And James, if you thought you were getting away without doing a set review this month, you are wrong, my friend, because we are going to review this card because it's kind of broken. Wrath of Leknif is 1 white, and a blue for a sorcery. Destroy all creatures. They can't be regenerated. Untap up to 4 lands you control. In a control deck, this is wild because normally the downside of wrathing the board is that your opponent gets to redeploy their threats first because they're the ones that are tapping with their mana. In theory, you're taking your turn off to wipe the board, and then your opponent gets to redeploy the threats first. This lets you redeploy your threats first because you are untapping your lands. I'm assuming there's some Storm payouts with this as well, probably because it untaps land. There's good things with that. This seems like one of the best cards for a control deck, maybe ever printed. I'm going to say printed because it is in paper now. You can get it in Mystery Booster 2. I'm hoping to pick one up. James, thoughts on this card? Would it make your cube?
Oh yeah, this card's incredibly messed up. It's really, really strong. Just the play pattern of 4 mana, like wipe your board, play a Planeswalker, or wipe your board, hold up permission, is so powerful. Yeah, as you said, the downside of Wraths, right, is you clean the board, they play the first threat. Sometimes it feels like you're already playing catch up again. You just don't have that issue here. This is how you. This both keeps you alive and turns the corner effectively. There's not another card like this in Magic. It's basically a 0 mana Wrath. Obviously, you can't play it until you have 4 mana, but it feels like a 0 mana Wrath. And And that was going to win a lot of games of Magic. Just imagine, like, turn 4, you kill their creatures and cast Jason Mind Sculptor. Like, that's insane. Yeah, no... obviously, it only goes in one deck, I guess, is the only downside, because, like, you can't really splash this in an otherwise non-white deck, and sure, you could splash the blue part of it, but realistically, you want this in a control deck anyway, so you're probably going to be blue regardless. But in that deck, it's going to be, like, one of your best cards, for sure.
I might have to take back what I said about Gideon Jura earlier. Although it is only 10p, currently this card is only like $1.50. So I'll probably be picking one up. The other card that was not included for being too good was Kai Buddhas. He ended up getting Void Mage Prodigy. The card in this cube is Wise Drafter's Will. It's a single blue for an enchantment that says your opponents play with their hand revealed. For a single blue, you can sacrifice it to draw a card, or you can pay blue to sacrifice it to counter target spell. This also seems exceptionally powerful, if I'm honest with you. The fact that, yeah, it's a permanent peak effect, so you get to see what your opponent's playing, and it's a counter spell from then on. That's nuts. Like, yes, you might cycle to draw a card at some point, but yeah, the counter spell, like having it on board, this seems broken, James.
Yeah, it's really strong. It's, I mean, I guess the sort of downside as much for as one is if you want to play it and counter something in the same turn, it's triple blue, and you are paying 3 mana for your counter. But you kind of care more about what's in their hand when you have counter spells, right? Like you know, if you're just playing out threats, it might not be as important to you to know what's in their hand. But this lets you know if the card they've put on the stack is for bait or not, right?
Yeah. You are guaranteed to counter the good spell with this.
Yeah. It's and there's a huge like threat of activation thing here, right? Like you can run this out, they'll play like their weaker card. You'll be like, yeah, fine, I don't care. And then you do something else for your mana. It's also, by the way, the mana might be tough to make this work, but imagine this in a lower stack.
Jesus, yeah, you just get it back. Oh no.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Doesn't exile itself, just
No, it does
sacrifices
not.
itself. So that could be, so that's some good clean fun for exactly one player.
You can have a Lurrus Companion deck with Wise Drafter's Will and Wrath of Leknif as well.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay.
That sounds great fun.
And for what it's worth, this is currently 76 cents.
Yeah.
So also pretty good. Pretty
for what
powerful.
it's worth, the only reason I might not put the Wisecrafter's Will in my cube is I don't love too many peak effects. I feel like Magic is just more fun when you don't know what's in your opponent's hand. I think it's like a Gip Phobe is fine, right? You get a snapshot, a discard spell. But having this around for like the whole game, I think could kind of not be that fun, actually.
My gut is if blue-based combo is not good enough in your cube and you want it to be better, this would be quite good there, because this effectively really lets you protect your combo, because you can see when their removal spell or something like that is coming, and it lets you counter it as well. So that could be a thing, but like the fact that this is just so free to just play on turn one, I could see this as being miserably broken.
And it's the thing of like, once it's in play, it's not just a counter spell, it's an uncounterable counter spell, right?
Yes, it's not on a spell.
So if you run this out on turn one, they can't counter back when you activate it, unless they have like a stifle or something.
Maybe like Soul Ring is an example of a cheap but broken card you shouldn't run in your lower powered level cubes. Maybe we test it. Maybe if I can get my hands on some Mystery Booster 2 product, maybe we'll give it a go. So set review bit out of the way. Sorry about that, James. Right, so let's move on with the video. So as we mentioned, there's a lot of expensive cards in this cube, and a lot of the effort of getting the one-on-one, the one-of-one cards. And also, like, part of the prize pool is that they flew the people out to Vegas and put them up in the hotels. They paid for their travel and accommodation on top of the cube. Like, just, James, roughly, like, do you think they made their money back? Kind of like, how successful do you think this event has been?
This event was phenomenally successful for them, I'm sure. Like, I'm saying they made a ton of money, but they made as much money as they could possibly have expected to make, because they had to limit how many people could enter the feeder leagues every single weekend, because they had fired too many. Yeah, because there's like a hard limit on how many they can run, right? Because there's only so many 64-man events, and it would be a real feel bad if people couldn't use their tokens that they'd got to play those. So yeah, every weekend, basically what happened was they put feeder leagues up, and when X number of qualification tokens had been given out, they were like, right, that's the end of entries for feeder leagues. So every single weekend they fired as many feeder leagues as they had allowed themselves to do. So yeah, they certainly made as much money as they could have hoped to make.
Actually, I'll be honest, I've just done a bit of math on this. So if we know the cube is worth about $65,000, like you'd think travel and accommodation they can do for all of the players for like $35,000. You'd assume. I guess I'm ballparking $100,000 for this whole thing.
Coverage is a little bit more, I guess. Even if we say another $20,000 for the coverage, that's like, so that's then you're at 120, and that's what, like 20,000 entries.
20,000 entries over 8 weeks. That's only 2,500 people entering this a week. Yeah, that seems incredibly doable.
Oh yeah, I think they made money.
All right, sick. They'll be doing it again next year then. You heard it here first.
They better be. I'm here for it. I will give them more of my money.
I will learn how to use Mitko by this time next year.
Nice.
That's not a promise. That is not a promise. Let's keep it rolling with the podcast. Let's talk about the draft. So specifically with this draft, it was Rochester draft. I'm assuming they did that specifically so you could see every card, because the way Rochester draft works is all 8 players are sat in a circle, and effectively a pack is opened and put on the table. Then the player in position 1 takes a card. It then goes round the table to the person in position 8, who takes 2 cards, and it starts going back the other way. Then the person to, I'm assuming, the left of whoever's in position 1, they are now the first drafter for the next pack that is laid out on the table. So effectively, you repeat that process for every pack. So from a time duration point of view, it takes a lot longer. This draft was like an hour and a half, something like that, I want to say. Like maybe with some intros and that kind of stuff and with like a break. But like effectively, this draft was like an hour and a half. The flip side of that was that we got to see every card that was being drafted. Importantly with this, and I think this is why they did this, we got to see when the power was drafted. If we are giving someone a Black Lotus in this draft, we want to see the moment where they slam that hand on the table and bring it over towards them. If you did it normally, you wouldn't see that. As a concept, I thought that was cool. James, what do you think of Rochester Draft? And also, what was your thoughts of it as a viewing experience as well?
Rochester Draft is interesting. It's the whole thing of it being face up sort of adds a bit of another dimension, right? Because you can see what everyone else is drafting. Obviously, there's 2 sides to that. Like, you can hate pick if you want, but you can also, it's also sort of easier theoretically to get in your lane. The other thing I'll say about Rochester Draft, though, because I've done it a couple of times, it's really difficult, especially with, like, Viscera and Awasar, as you said, they normally take much longer than that. This was with pretty tight time constraints. They had before each pack, they had like a minute to look at the pack before anyone picked a card to sort of process. But then once someone had picked a card, they had 5 seconds each per pick. Rochester Draft, there's so much information to process because you're processing everyone else's decks, you're processing your deck, and you're thinking about, if you're considering in that 1 minute and you're going like 6th, you have to think about like what cards might I be choosing for between, because I only have 5 seconds when it's actually on me. And that's really difficult, right? Because there's still always going to be spots where you have a choice you hadn't considered and you have like no time to make your decision. I think that was probably why we saw some picks that looked very weird, even outside of the money drafting stuff, right? But I think that was a lot why, because Rochester Draft I think is just harder in a lot of ways than other drafts. Because you're also in spots where you're like, well, I know no one else wants this card that I kind of want out of this pack. So maybe I don't need to take it first time, right? Maybe I can get it on the second run through. But also, if this is like the Yargmoth's will that my whole deck needs, say, like someone might just hate it from me because they don't really have anything else and they don't want to play against a really good Storm deck.
Yeah, or they could just take it because it could be the most valuable card. Because again, this has the additional element to it that the players were keeping the card. So we did see a lot of the first player picking from a pack, picking just the most expensive card rather than the one best for their deck, because there was cards in it, like there was a Black Lotus opened. Obviously, that person, like, that's good in any deck, but like there were some players who took like lesser power level cards, but they were worth like 500 quid, $1,000, that kind of thing. Taking that first because it has a longer impact on your life than in one draft, I guess, makes sense.
Yeah, the one that really made me laugh was Moat, which was in there. The like first or second pick Moat, which is, I don't know why I said it's not really a playable card in that sort of cube, but yeah, I think it's worth like close to $1,000. So sure, you're absolutely taking it. But yeah, no, I think Rochester Draft is an interesting FAF format. It's hard to get done in time, which is why there were those time constraints. And yeah, I think that makes it tough to make like optimal decisions all the way down.
Yeah. It was something they used to do a lot more. Like, I think back in the day, Rochester Draft was the draft style of choice for limited events. And one of the reasons they got rid of it was because of the timing restrictions, but also because it meant people, because there's the face-up element, people in like from teams or working with each other, it is easier to kind of like control the table a little bit. And that used to happen a lot with kind of like the older pros who knew what they were doing. They could be like, okay, I'm going to take all this color, you're going to take all that color, I'm going to set you up, that kind of stuff. So, but for this, I think it made the most sense. I guess one negative maybe I would say is that, yeah, there is a lot of information to keep in place. And it was really cool to see people open these cards and get basically open and get to keep power, because that's wild. You do not get to see that ever nowadays. But it did make keeping track of everyone's deck a little bit tricky. Like, even like it was Marshall, Sutcliffe, and Reed Duke commentating on this. And outside of maybe LSV, there aren't really two other people who could commentate on a vintage cube probably as well with the amount of casting experience that they have. And they had trouble keeping track of who had what. Generally, so we will go over the decks in a moment, or we'll pick out some kind of interactions. We'll pick up some bits in the decks that we thought were cool. But kind of the feeling of the draft was that we kind of roughly knew who the best deck was, because Luka Jakovitz, he ended up with 3 bits of power. He ended up with a Time Walk, an Ancestral Recall, and a Mox Jet. 3 bits of power is a lot of power. So kind of generally after day one, we assumed he would have the best deck. My feeling anyway was the second best deck was his father's deck, Rex Jakovitz, because he had the only real aggro deck at the table. He wasn't really being fought for it too much, and he had a Black Lotus with that. And obviously, that is a very most expensive card in Magic. In an aggro deck, it can like in combo decks, it can do very broken things. In like even if this is just casting a Fable of the Mirror Breaker on turn 1, sometimes that can just win you a game of Magic. Like, these are still very broken things. Outside of that, it was kind of hard to keep track of what decks were with what. There was kind of an idea that some people had like bits of a Reanimator package, some people had a bit of an Aristocratic deck, and the other one we saw was that someone did end up with like Show and Tell, Eureka, Channel Emrakul, I think, which is kind of vibes. That looked like a very cool take. But kind of, so that was kind of the draft. Let's move on to actually breaking down the decks a little bit. So obviously there are 8 decks. We're going to kind of go through the ones that we thought were the most interesting. So let's start with Luka Jakovitz. As we mentioned, he had 3 bits of power. He kind of ended up in like an Esper control-y deck. Like, his top end was kind of stacked. He had things like Elspeth Sun's Champion. He had Elspeth Knight Errant. He had the Scarab God. That is a very scary card, especially in this format. Combine that with a bunch of removal. There's like a Vendetta, there's a Swords to Plowshares, there's a Toxic Deluge, there's a Vindicate. He basically had a pretty good Esper control deck with, importantly, Time Walk, Ancestral Recall, and also having cards like Snapcaster Mage as a way of recasting those spells, and even had the Spellseeker to go and find 2 of his bits of power. I guess the one downside is that the fixing on his deck was a bit ropey, but I don't know, an Ancestral Recall kind of can fix a multitude of mistakes.
Yeah, obviously the power level of the spells is off the charts, but I think you're being very kind to his mana base with a bit ropey.
All right, it's a Watery Grave and a Celestial Colonnade.
It's 7/7/6.
There's a Mox.
I was including the Mox.
Were you? Okay,
yes.
right, fair enough.
7/7/6 is not okay. when you're trying to class like Skyclave Apparition, Wandering Inverse, double white, there's double blue. It's it's really I feel like you need to high roll pretty well with this mana. It seems like you would have a lot of games where you don't cast your spells. I don't know. It felt to me like, obviously I didn't see like the whole process of the draft from his point of view. My guess is here he was kind of trying to be blue-white and didn't get enough cards to not splash for black. Because if you don't splash for black, it would be fine, right? But he ends up playing black for like Hostage Taker, Scarab God, Reanimate, Vendetta, Deluge. Which is obviously like powerful cards, but this mana's really tough. When the mana works, this deck's going to be great. Walk's an insane card already, but is sort of at its best with Planeswalkers. Ancestral's obviously like busted in any deck that can 1-for-1, which this deck can do very well. I think if the mana works, there's nothing wrong with this deck. But I guess you could argue you're a bit vulnerable to aggro with you'd love to have you have a swords as well, actually. I didn't even see the swords.
There's two board wipes here. There's Wings of Abandon and Deluge. Which is nice.
Winds is no,
it can be a board wipe. Yes.
Yeah. But I think the main challenge here is just for mana.
I don't know, James. All I'm hearing is I don't need to draft lands anymore. Let's go. I'll get that 15 pink Celestial Colonnade and I'm fine.
You heard it here first.
Nice. So the next one we wanted to talk about, let's jump ahead. Let's talk about Jesse Hampton. You mentioned you want to talk about this one, James. And is it purely because there's an opposition and a retrofitter foundry in here?
I wouldn't say purely, but it's related. This is, again, I think you're seeing in a lot of these decks, they are a bit scrappy. I think a lot of that is to do with A, the format of Rochester draft, and B, money drafting. Like money drafting, you're just going to burn a bunch of picks on cards that don't go in your deck.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning from the draft, he actually had a lot of black cards in his pool, but didn't run them in the deck. I'm assuming just because, he's probably being more sensible with his mana. I can see we have like a Flooded Strand here, we have a Tundra, we have a Scrubland. So he's kind of, and we have a Hallowed Fountains. So here I see more, he has gone with the more consistent deck rather than just like running a bunch of power cards. But there's still some good stuff in here. We mentioned the opposition, but there is a Fractured Identity, which in this slower kind of cube where there's a bit more grind, something like a Fractured Identity seems very, very strong. Yeah,
for sure. The other thing he's got going on here is the Tolarian Academy, which is, and he's a sort of mid-academy deck otherwise, but Tolarian Academy Retrofitter is really messed up. And he's got the Trinket Mage to go and find the Retrofitter, so when you draw your academy, you're going to be able to put that together quite a lot. There's also Mana Crypt in here to get you into mana early. This is, obviously a bit of a scrappy one. I think he did quite a lot of pivoting in the draft, as you say, but I think comes together to something which I could definitely see working here. And did spend those picks on mana, which comes through here. It worked quite well. But the one thing that's a shame is if he'd ended up with the walk, it would have been incredible because he has the Regrowth, Eternal Witness, and even has the Ephemerate to go with the Eternal Witness. And Ephemerate, Eternal Witness, Time Walk is just infinite turns. But because obviously the first time you ephemerate your witness, you get back the walk. You walk, ephemerate rebounds. On when you rebound it, you eternal witness back the ephemerate and go again. But so he missed on the walks. He'd even have, I'm sure, played like some of the 5 mana walks in, but he missed on those, which is a shame. But he's got like good planeswalkers, good top end, and good mana.
Yeah, also worth mentioning there is a Mana Crypt in here, which is in terms of fast mana, probably better than all the Moxes, but not what you want to open in this, given its recent price issues, shall we say.
Oh, that's true, yeah. I hadn't considered that.
But let's move on to, I really like this deck. This was Fernando Palmero Garcia's deck. He effectively ended up with it's a Rakdos deck with a touch of blue, but it was kind of like a sacrifice deck. There's a lot of cool stuff in here. So in terms of just raw power level cards, it's worth mentioning he has a Mox Emerald. That he was the he got power that looked very cool. But kind of the bread and butter of this deck is things like Ophiomancers, Bitter Blossoms, combined with things like Mayhem Devil, Marionette Apprentice, Goblin Bombardment, and the Meathook Massacre. Like, that is an aristocrat shell, and he put it to good use in this. I really like this deck. Like, that was kind of the bread and butter, but then there's a few other cool cards on top of that. What stood out to you, James, from this one?
Yeah, this looks like a really nice one. Yeah, really solid creature removal like Pyrokinesis, Bitter Triumph, and stuff like the 3-mana Duretti, I think, is great here. On the pluses to make 1/1s and minuses Twitter artifacts, and minuses to sack an artifact to kill a creature artifact. It's like super strong grindy card anyway. Then when you combine it with stuff like the Mayhem Devil or the Meathook Massacre, really gives it that extra level. And obviously the Marionette Apprentice plays really well into that. Goblin Bombardment is a you've got to mean it a bit more, but like when it works, it's really good. And you've got that Bitter Blossom, you've got the Ophiomancer. I think this all knits together quite well. Probably like looks a bit more cohesive than I think than some of the other decks we saw.
Yeah.
On top of the Mox Emerald, you have a Dark Ritual as well, which is going to get you some free wins in this sort of format just by like Dark Ritual out Glorybringer or whatever, nice and early. And yeah, again, his mana actually looks quite good as well. The blue's quite a light splash, and he's got quite a bit of fixing.
Yeah, there's 2 fetches. There's a Spirebluff Canal, which is the fast land, but also the Xander's Lounge. So that's effectively a kind of a free splash. The top end on this deck, I did really quite like shockingly. Like it was. So you mentioned the Glorybringer, but he also has a Thundermaw Hellkite, a Goldspan Dragon, and a Zealous Conscripts. That will just end games. Like if you can, like he has the Mox and he has the Dark Ritual. You can just steal games in this deck. Like there is definitely the grindy plan. But then when you got them down to roughly like 7, I don't know, play a Glorybringer, smack them with it, sack it to your Goblin Bombardment, drain them off the Meathook Massacre or the Marionette Apprentice, and you win. Like that's really powerful.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when we talk about like sacrifice as a theme in Cube, we often think it has to be sort of what your deck is all about. And I think in higher power level cubes, this is often more what sacrifice decks look like. You're playing like 90% just good cards, like good grindy cards and some aggressive bits that can get in damage. And then the sacrifice stuff is sort of your late game thing, which gets in the last 6 or 7 points. Or like your Goblin Bombardment can just control the board, right? You have Goblin Bombardment, Bitter Blossom going, but you can kill all their creatures, and then eventually you kill them because you had a Mayhem Devil or a Meathook Massacre or something.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like just looking at this deck, it does look quite. I don't want to say linear, but it does look like play Sacrifice Outlets, play Token Makers, finish with the Dragon. But like, I'll be honest with you, like the lines, like from the gameplay, the lines out of this deck that I saw were the most interesting to me. That he had so many choices in terms of when to do stuff, how to trigger things. I thought this, for me, this was my favorite deck of all of them. I don't think it was the most powerful, which we'll get onto when we get to results and stuff. But I think from just everything in this deck looks like as you mentioned, the decks are quite scrappy. This doesn't look like a scrappy deck. There's power in here. There's good interaction. There's a top end. There's a game plan, and the mana looks nice as well. Like this, like Fernando drafted very well with this deck.
Yeah, I think that really comes across. The only thing that would slightly concern me if this was like a deck I had drafted and was taken into a tournament was that you'd really love a bit of discard in here, because you have a lot of removal to interact with the aggressive people, but you don't have any ways really to disrupt a combo deck, or if a combo deck isn't involving creatures, or a control deck is, your control deck can just deal with your Thundermaw Hellkite quite reasonably, and you don't have those discard spells to attack the hand.
Yeah, something like a Thoughtseize or a Mind Twist would be spectacular in this deck.
Yeah, for sure. Even just like a duress, right? I think, if you could exchange like the the fire ice for a duress, I'd feel pretty good about that.
If you said Curse Scroll, then James, I would have ended this recording immediately.
Well, you see, you can as a target for your Curse Scroll, you see. So you've got to run
that happened, and it was great. All right, Curse Scroll coming back into my cube. You love to see it. All right. The last one we wanted to kind of touch on in like more detail was Chris Bruner's deck. He drafted, I'm not going to say mono green, but it's effectively the green deck with a splash of blue. So in here we have like a bottom end with things like Birds of Paradise, Lotus Cobra, Paradise Druid. We have Utopia Sprawl. We have some signets. The early game is ramping. Also in this deck, we have Channel, we have Show and Tell, we have Eureka as our big dumb enablers. And then on top of that, we have things like Primetime, Kozilek Butcher of Truth, Ulamog Ceaseless Hunger, Emrakul the Aeon's Taunt. When that comes together, this feels very glass cannon-y, but when that comes together, that feels quite scary.
Yeah, I really like this deck. This is one you don't see come together a ton in Vintage Cube, but it can really work when it does. Eureka is a card which I think has been in and out of Cube, so I actually really like it. I think it's not going to get played every draft, but when it does, it's going to do some really cool stuff. And the fact that you can just keep going with Eureka, you're like, cast a Eureka, here's my Emrakul. Oh, you'll put in a thing. Oh, here's my Portal to Phyrexia. Put your thing in the graveyard, please. It's really sick card. And Show and Tell, obviously great. It works for all the same stuff. Titania, it looks like he's not an amazing Titania deck, but he's got a few ways of sacking the lands with he's got one fetch and a Waterlog Grove. Really nice deck. Again, more of a sort of clear directional game plan than some of the others. Looks like it came together pretty well for him. And you just have those 3 wins, right, with turn 2 Channel into Emrakul or Kozilek or something.
And one thing that actually makes this deck better, and it's kind of one of the reasons we're not touching on some of the other decks, is because effectively Reanimator was split between 3 players. There was 3 players fighting for the Reanimates, the Animate Deads, the Grizzle Brands, the Archons, the big payoffs, that kind of, basically the whole deck. There is not a dedicated Reanimator deck, and in that kind of environment where you're not worried about what your opponent is putting into play, you're much more comfortable hitting off that Show and Tell, hitting that Eureka, because you're basically guaranteed to have the biggest thing. Because I'm going through the rest of the decks, the biggest other thing in the whole cube is what, or that sort of play was what, a Glory Bringer, a Grave Titan. Oh, the one player was running an Archon of Cruelty actually, but their plan, Daniel Prosek's plan was to ramp out the Archon of Cruelty. He wasn't doing anything. There was no cheating. It was a fair Archon. Seems like a bit of a push even in this kind of environment, but kind of knowing that most of the field isn't going to have an answer to your big stuff is a very nice feeling.
Yeah, for sure. And even if they do have something scary, at least you know about it, right? Because Rochester draft is all face up.
Yeah.
So you know what the worst thing they could put in is, and you can play around that to a certain extent. I guess the other one that could definitely get you is if the Mindslaver guy puts in the Mindslaver. That could be quite fun.
Nice.
Put in Mindslaver you, channel you to death. Could be a way you could go wrong. But I think that deck looks really sweet, actually. I'd love to see a bit more of it on camera.
Yeah. No, I agree. Those are the decks we want to deep dive into. I'll kind of give a brief summary of the other decks just so you have just for completionism. So as you mentioned, Daniel Prosek's deck was kind of a Reanimator deck without the reanimation stuff. So it was kind of it looked like a solid blue-black control deck, but the top end was things like Grave Titan trying to hardcast stuff. Powerful cards were the Wise Drafter's Will that we mentioned, but also the Grim Monolith as a bit of ramp. We then have Rek Jakovic's deck. As we mentioned before, it's effectively a Boris aggro deck that kind of goes to 4 mana for Chandra, Torture Defiance, and Hellrider. Not too much with this deck. It is kind of a straight meat and veg aggro deck, but the Lotus being the key card there. Then we have Matt Abrams. He was kind of a Naya Landsy style of deck. This one seems like it has a bunch of different moving pieces, and the mana seems quite tricky. Or like he has a lot of lands, but the key thing with this deck is that there is a Fast Bond, Crucible, Zuranorb stuff in here with a bunch of fetch lands. So basically, he can get every land out of his deck and gain infinite life. Very cool deck, but it does seem a bit even more glass cannony because effectively you're it's a very all-in combo deck, and you're probably planning on winning with like there's a pest infestation when you have infinite mana, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, when you have infinite mana, you also have infinite life, right? So you can...
That's true, yeah.
You can kind of win with whatever. I liked the Splashed Enlightened tutor that goes and gets all the pieces of your land combo as well. I thought that was quite cool. Yeah, but I think you mostly win with like these dumb creatures, right? Like your questing beast.
There's a questing beast in here. Yeah, that's how you actually.
Yeah. There's the glare of subdual was funny to me as well. This is
I've not seen that in a hot minute.
Yeah. Because opposition was so good, we needed the bad opposition.
I need
a
second one. Yes, yes, love that. Okay, nice. And then the last deck is Oscar Christensen. This effectively is the combos. So he had a bunch in here. Oh, he had a couple in here. He had things like Zerda Basalt Monolith for infinite mana. He had Kiki-Jiki Splinter Twin and Deceiver Exarch for those combos. I'm not gonna say this is all over the place, but like it has some powerful cards. Like there's a Balance in here, there's a Mana Drain, there's a Jace the Mind Sculptor in here. But it kind of feels like it's trying to do a couple of different things. It's kind of pulled in multiple directions. It's for a combo deck. I think I'd want a bit more card draw. Like there's a Wishcore Talisman for some tutoring, but outside of that, you are looking to just hard draw your combo pieces, which does seem a bit tricky.
Yeah, for sure. I think the welders with the Mindslaver is kind of an interesting angle, right? And you do have quite a lot of cheap artifacts. Maybe you can do something there. There's just like an Emery to mill over your artifacts, even like a Caracas to keep milling with your Emery. So yeah, you can maybe do something with that, but it's yeah, it looks like you'd need to draw well, put it that way.
No, exactly. Cool. So those are the decks. Let's talk about the results. So the whole thing was taken down by Luka Jakovic with the 3 power. So the games of this were very cool. So they showed we generally saw at least 2 games for each round, apart from the final round where it was just the main event because the games had finished and they'd cut to a different one. Luka's deck, he didn't really get mana screwed. If I'm honest with you, he was not really punished. There was a couple of, I think, iffy keeps that were kind of, well, they were iffy keeps, but there's an ancestral in there. The games with this deck were kind of punishing to watch at times. I don't know if that's the best way to describe it, but basically, a lot like effectively this deck looked like it was losing for all the time. It was like 1 for 1 answering their threats, answering what they were doing, and then at some point you land a Scarab God or a Wandering Emperor or an Elspeth Sun's Champion, and kind of and that's how you slowly turn the corner. Like he didn't really run away with a lot of games, but he definitely slowly pulled his way back into a lot of games, and that's kind of like, I mean, it's a control deck. That's kind of what we were expecting, basically.
Yeah, I'd say definitely like lent on the power pretty hard in a lot of the games that I saw. But yeah, I mean, but you know, you open Walk and Ancestral, and that's what you're going to do. And yeah, I think the deck played well. Yes, I would say kind of got away with it a bit mana wise, but you know, it happens, and you've got a lot of powerful cards, and fair play to him. He it came together pretty well.
I am never drafting a land again, James. It's fine. I'll just open everything else perfectly and draw flawlessly. Everything's fine. Second place was Fernando with the kind of Grixis sack deck. I thought he played really, really well. Like, again, as I mentioned, like looking at this deck, it looks pretty straightforward. But yeah, there were so many awesome lines with this. Yeah. If I'm honest, yeah, in the final game, kind of just got like outpowered and out-resourced, basically. Against the control-y deck, against the Luka's deck, there just becomes a point where you're just losing just in terms of just card advantage and just threats. And and Fernando wasn't able to really kind of close that gap in time, basically, in the games I saw. So he came second. In third place was Rek Jakovic with the aggro deck. This just curved out and killed people. Yeah, it looked like a very solid deck. And like a solid deck, and he wasn't really being fought too hard for the aggro pieces. I think maybe from the draft, towards the end, I think he didn't take a I think he took he didn't take a Isamaru because he thought he could get it on the wheel, and then someone else just took it randomly because they were in white. Outside of that, he basically got every 90% of the pieces that were available to him in terms of aggro. And when an aggro player is left alone to go and do what they want, they're gonna do well. His deck has a Ragavan, it has a Hell Rider. You're just gonna kill people.
Yeah, for sure. The deck was solid. Had some sketchy lines at some point, but I think kept the as you say, just power level of deck, strong aggro cards up and down the curve, and a Black Lotus is going to play well.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the rest of the standings, we have no idea. We have both searched for multiple days. They're not posted. They're not posted online on the Ultimate Guard website, and they're not on Twitter. We've both gone back and tried to watch and watch the Twitch VOD, and it's not really announced. So, all players had fun. I don't know.
All players had fun, got to go to Vegas, had everything paid for, and took home some powerful and expensive Magic cards. And it was cool to watch.
It was very cool to watch. We're kind of coming to the end a little bit, but what were your thoughts overall, James, in terms of just as a tournament, as a thing they were doing? What did you think of the Vintage Cube Live?
I really liked the tournament as not just as the thing that happened at the weekend, but the thing that started a few months ago and ran all the way through, because it's just such a interesting and unique thing to be playing for, right? And it definitely got me motivated to go and be spiky about Cube, and I quite like that. In terms of the experience of watching this weekend, I thought I enjoyed watching it. I think there's some stuff they could have done better in terms of the coverage. Not the commentators were great, actually. Marshall and Reed did a phenomenal job and calling it, and I even just enjoyed the pre-draft chat even with them. But the coverage of a draft, especially, you couldn't really tell. It was very hard to keep track of what people were drafting. I think it sounds achievable to me, right? To have people, because it's all face up anyway, have people taking notes and inputting into a computer somewhere, this is what these players have. And then each time they have, to the start of each pack, they have a minute to consider. Start of each pack, they're going, right, we're going to look at this person's pile. This is the list of cards they have. What does this player want? Have a quick chat about where that drafter is at. And I think that would have made the draft a lot more watchable in terms of having a bit of a narrative beyond just, look at the power that was opened, which I think is kind of what they focused on a lot, which I get because it's cool and unique. And I want to watch Black Lotus be open too. But it's I also want to actually watch the draft, It's not just footage of someone putting a Black Lotus on a table and then moving it to their hand. It's not what I'm here for entirely.
Yeah, I completely agree. Stuff like that is certainly doable. It's just people power, basically. You would need a couple of people doing that. And I would have liked to have seen that, to at least kind of because we didn't really get to see our view of people's pools was effectively a picture taken on a phone the next day. So when they would before they revealed decks on day 2, they showed someone had just taken a picture of people's pools laid out, and then they went to an actual graphic of the decks. But it would have been nicer to have that in a bit more real time, basically.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, from my end, because I hate Migo. This almost got me, and if they do it again, maybe I'll throw some money into the pockets of better players. But I I really liked hearing, the stories of you playing in it. We had plenty of other friends who played in it. We had a friend who got very, very close to getting there. I liked hearing that part, and for me, watching it was very cool. This is like one of the first, like, I don't really watch Worlds that much, like standard that, like, I do a Cube podcast and I talk about Commander on weekends. Like, those are the formats I like. I don't really engage as much with stuff like Worlds and that kind of stuff. So this is the first kind of like live Magic thing I've watched in quite a while, and I made a thing of like, because it was on at some ungodly time in the morning for us. I literally woke up Saturday and Sunday morning. First thing I did was go downstairs, make a cup of tea, and put this on because I wanted to watch it, and I'm glad I did, and I enjoyed it. Yeah. I would my main takeaway from it was that I want to see more paper cube content. Like, I get that it exists out there. People will let it go and do cube drafts, and that's awesome. But this really struck home to me that I want to see paper cube play. And I know there's people out there who do it, and there are channels who do it. I know I don't know if Milo the Gathering is still doing or is still doing it. He was a creator of several years ago. Some people are probably doing it, but like this level of like one high. I know we both have our issues with the coverage that with the graphics the day before, but this was still a high level coverage. Because you have people like Marshall Sutcliffe and Reed Duke doing commentary on it. It feels like Magic coverage. It feels like real Magic coverage, if that makes sense. I want that with like the best players in the world. Like basically Worlds, make Worlds Cube, and I would be in, and that would be awesome. Like make Cube a competitive format and do content on it. I think it'd be awesome. Alternatively, I might just have to make it myself. Subscribe to the channel. Yeah, I would like. I've been thinking there are things we can do. Drafts is tricky, but we can definitely do gameplay and stuff. But yeah, that's a thing for another day. And then my other takeaway was I really liked this cube, like the actual cube that they drafted. Like not like take out the awesome 1/1 cards because they're awesome. I love that, but just the cube design as a whole, I really liked. Like I left watching this being like I should make like a cube that stops at the year like 90 that stops at like 2018 or something like that, like stops at like Theros block and just have it and leave it, and it's brought out like twice a year and we draft it, that kind of thing. It would be proxy for reference. I'm not going to buy a whole cube to draft twice a year, but proxy wise, yeah, I think that would be sweet. I would really like that.
Yeah, for sure. It was like, I'm not saying it's like better or worse than what Powered Cube looks like with the more up-to-date versions, but is a very different experience, and it's really cool to have that as an option, I think. Like I think I've spoken to you before about doing about Powered Cube minus supplemental product, so which I think is a lot of the cards that make it feel very different, right? Like
up until next year, but yes.
Yeah. But I mean, it's not the stuff that's gone through standard in the last few years. It's the Gut, it's the Lelio, it's the Broadside Bombardiers, it's the Minsk and Boo, I think that would be an interesting avenue to explore. But yes, it was cool getting to see some of the older cards have another day in the sun,
Exactly. And I guess kind of like the final point I kind of want to make on this is like, specifically, they were drafting this cube on the same weekend when we had all the announcements of all the Universes Beyond stuff coming into standard and stuff. And effectively, you had like the two juxtaposition corners. You had what Magic has been and has got it to here. Like there's like, again, loves like just seeing a Jackal Pup made my heart skip a beat. Like, it was just like, awesome. That is cool. That is Magic. It's good to know that Cube can always still be that, basically.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So I think that's where we're going to leave it for today. James, pleasure as always. Thank you, man.
Yeah, always good. Thank you.
Nice one. It just leaves me to thank you all very much for listening. Do give the podcast a 5-star review, tell a friend, spread the word, all that good stuff. Helps the podcast grow, helps us do more cool and awesome things. But until next time, it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from James, and we'll see you all soon. Goodbye.